I think around the time I was like 22, somewhere around there, I started making my first like serious photo project, which is called We Shared the Same Color That Evening. And I kind of consider that to be my first like undergraduate photography project, because I've never went to school for photography. And that I just kind of aped off of whatever I could see on like Ain't Bad and Photo Room and like the Heavy Collective. And I found photographers like Mercer Chaffetz, Ian Klein, Layla Barth, Joe Leavenworth, people like that, and I really looked up to them for their kind of fusion of this thing of like cinematic looking photography that still held its own weight as being a photograph. And I thought that was really special, and it had this really nice narrative quality to it that I was trying to find. I think Raymond Meeks is one of those people who just has this very unique sensibility, and this kind of like, you can tell that there's a level of experience and a level of adulthood that's already with his pictures in a way that's very specific to just him. For me, the subject matter is something that's so, again, universal, but so specific and so qualitative to what he can produce. I know that this is the world within a photographer's eyes, and I know that this is all just in one person's backyard, but it's almost like he's creating a physical document of his psychology and his kind of like aging process. And that's something that I'm really drawn to, is that. I think that what kind of changed my trajectory of like what kind of photography I was going to be making is when my dad got sick, and then after that whole experience, it kind of made me more grounded and not really going out into the world as much, but kind of being more introspective in like what's already around me at the moment. I got a phone call from my dad, who was kind of frantically crying over the phone, and that, saying that he had loved me and and that he had just had like a stroke. So we didn't really know what was going on then. And then I think my stepmom at the time had called me and tried to tell me the full story, that like he'd had a stroke, he's in the hospital, he's kind of like losing a little bit of a, feeling in part of his body right now. You need to come here, you need to come here, you need to come here. That kind of thing, that kind of urgency. So at the time, my his side of the family were in Taiwan. So thankfully, one of my aunts is a nurse, so she was actually able to travel over and then kind of get a little more of a structured read of the situation. I reluctantly did not want to go because I had just gotten back, just been like already taken on this kind of huge amount of debt just to be able to do this trip. So I was kind of like, oh my God, what do I do? Ended up going, obviously. I sold some of my camera equipment just to be able to pay for the flight over. And I stayed with him for about 2 or 3 months while we were getting the proper diagnosis done for him. So there were a lot of like, what were quote unquote like, last dinners, because we don't really know when it's going to happen or anything like that. We don't really even know what the diagnosis is going to be. So I think that they had me in some of the waiting rooms, and that's when they were getting that's when they were doing the operations for him. And we noticed that he was getting a lot slower, kind of like every couple days. And I think that's when they had kind of told me privately, like, he's got a stage 4 glioblastoma. He has maybe like 9 months to a year left at best. Unless he's the 1% who can push through this, like, say what you need to say in the last, months that you have with him. So it was kind of a freak thing that he even got glioblastoma, because he had always been a very healthy person. He had always been, he was like a practicing like capoeira guy. He was always in mixed martial arts, and like he wanted to be a professional boxer too. So it's really weird that he even got the tumor that he got. But I think for the most part, I had believed that he was going to be able to recover, because it seemed like if there was someone who was going to be able to beat the odds, it would have been him. That, most of the patients that are our cancer doctor had been telling us about, that they'd always kind of had this, that they were always weak from the beginning, and that it was kind of always we know what's going to happen. With my dad, on the other hand, it was such a freak thing where, like, even physically in the pictures, he's still like the most in shape person among the entire family and like among a lot of other people. So it was just like, no, like of course she's gonna be able to make it. And I had always planned that I would be coming back, you know, the following year, or like trips have been offered to me during COVID or just prior to COVID for me to come back to Vietnam and spend more time with him. But I felt that with the tension between my stepmother and the condition that my dad was in getting progressively worse and worse, that I didn't really have anything else that I wanted to say to him. And I think after that point, it kind of all ramped up where he was more concerned about what he was leaving for us. And I remember one conversation that he didn't know that I was listening to, where he told my aunt that he felt that my photography and my like kind of like life plan to that point was kind of total nonsense. It would never amount to anything. And so upon me telling him that I had overheard him say that, there was a big argument, and as reconciliation for that, his idea was that that we would collaborate on a documentary project for him, thinking that this is going to be his kind of process to recovery, and that he wanted to have some sort of documentation of like, this is what it's like to go through this process. This is what glioblastoma is. This is what the healthcare system in Vietnam is like. This is kind of what that weighs upon the whole family. We had just gotten him to be able to walk just a little bit. And this is obviously post the brain surgery and the recovery, somewhat recovery. I had come back to Seattle, and most of our relationship had been over like vibraphone calls and kind of like whatever my ex-stepmom could tell me through text messages and emails at the time. And obviously around like March, I got the call from my mom that he had passed. And when I had tried to reconcile with my ex-stepmother, she had kind of essentially disowned me. So I didn't really know what to do with the images, because we had the idea that these were going to be a very positive and kind of hopeful kind of thing. But at that point, I just kind of had them all archived because I didn't know what these images were going to mean anymore. And at a point, I had a friend who was going to BARD at the time and had been showing me a lot of his like kind of archived images that he was trying to make into a project. And I think just out of like COVID times, I did the same, and I think something had emerged that I didn't realize from the work. And I think every year something new has been kind of emerging from it. But I had flown back for the first time in 4 years to Hawaii and uncovered a briefcase that he had never like shown me before. And in the briefcase was the were all the letters that I had written to him, all of the pictures that I'd given him, and his prison sentencing forms as well. So it was just a lot of things that were being unearthed that he had never spoken of, he had never really shown me. It was a lot of truths about like why he was in prison that were kind of being unearthed, and that's kind of what's included in the project right now too. I would say that I'm discovering more about him through the archives, but I think recently I have still been making images for the project. I went down to Hawaii like last week, like a week before he even talked to me, and then apparently part of his will was that only my ex-stepmother and myself could handle his ashes. So my popo, or my Chinese grandmother, he had all of his ashes in this like box. And so while I was there, it was my duty to, or my, you know, my job or whatever, to find places for me to spread the ashes for Hawaii. So in some of the pictures that I sent you, there's my popo dividing the ashes outside on our floor, and she's putting them in like lemonade bottles and like an empty container for me to take back. And I used it. I spread some of the ashes, but they're kind of funny pictures. And there's one picture that's like a backlit still life of what's innocuously just those Sprite bottles in like plastic bags, and that's, I don't know, kind of fitting for it. You know, I don't think that our lives are necessarily that dramatic. I mean, you know, losing a father, of course, is going to have ramifications to everything, but I don't think that there's a whole lot of a whole lot of other lifelong stories that I really have in my mind, but that there is a series of smaller moments that build a person. And I think even this was kind of something that I would consider as a kind of like a turning point where, like, you know, the whole experience of going to Vietnam and then, you know, kind of having a falling out with my stepmother and losing my father and then all this, that the bigger revelation was just rereading through what he had kept. And I think that's something that impacted me more than that experience.